In this video, I want to react to Whatifalthist's new video on the Weimar. And what's interesting is that usually leftists make this comparison of America today and Weimar. But Whatifalthist has his own very unique and kind of bizarre take on the Weimar. Okay, so let us start.
There are certain eras of history that shouldn't happen. However, due to weird combinations of events that no one expected, they end up occurring. The Weimar is one of them. Due to bizarre, which is a word I keep using to describe this time period for a reason, factors, a social group which would never otherwise take over society became dominant in German culture for over a decade. To start the story, Germany is a large pluralistic country. I think it's easy for Americans to forget how diverse European countries can be, in that a nation like Germany 100 years ago was filled with loads of different regional cultures, dialects, political and interest groups, all jostling together. Germany was also the largest economy in Europe and the most advanced society in the world artistically, culturally, philosophically, or scientifically. This means that the Germany of this era had immense internal contrasts, much like America today. Carroll Quigley, in his book Tragedy and Hope, has said that the Germany of this era was run by 5 different social groups. That being the monarchy, the Junker warrior nobility in Prussia who led the military, the industrialists concentrated in the Rhineland, the imperial bureaucracy, and the trade unionists. Except for the trade unionists, all of these were incredibly conservative. This is one of the biggest divides in Weimar and today, in that the conservatives were the deep state and the establishment, while today the left dominates those. What had occurred with the end of World War I was the creation of an artificial Germany, which very few people wanted.
Okay, what should be emphasized is that while it does make sense to describe the Weimar establishment as conservative, the Weimar Republic was actually one of the most liberal countries in the world. Why is that? Because in the Weimar, gay sex was legal, while in Great Britain, at the time, punishment for having gay sex was chemical castration. Also, women were allowed to vote in the Weimar, while in France, up until 1944, they weren't. And what is so tragic about Hitler coming into power is that he came to power in such a liberal society and he descended it back into darkness of the pre-Enlightenment era, because fascism looks with a dangerous nostalgia to the past, often a mythical past, a pre-Enlightenment past. But yeah, so Whatifalthist previously in this video calls the Weimar period degenerate. Now, I can understand why somebody would say that, but you also need to emphasize how very liberal it was, and that it was, in that aspect at least, very positive. But okay, to be the devil's advocate, why does it actually make sense to say that the period was degenerate? Well, there was a lot of promiscuous sex, a lot of drugs being used, and what Michael Bollray emphasizes is that the German morality of the pre-World War era was almost turned upside down. In what sense? War profiteers were doing quite well after the war, while honest small businesses were destroyed, either in the war or in the great economic crisis that happened after the war during the hyperinflation period. And also, what's interesting is that during the hyperinflation period, those that spent all their money on prostitutes, drugs, and alcohol, they kind of were very happy with their decision, while those that saved all of their money, they lost everything. And that also kind of led to the moral core of the Weimar being eroded. Okay, but let us continue.
Happened with the Weimar period to make it appear like our era of history is that due to the Great Depression and World War II, the seeds planted in Weimar lay pregnant for decades. Then in the 1960s, a lot of them started to flower again. The 1920s are the parents to the 1960s. As the 60s established the cultural code which we have until today, as the logic of the system started to work through, you ended up with a culture like that from which it originated it, that being the Weimar period. The irony is that most people hated the Weimar Republic except for one demographic, that being the leftist intellectuals and artists who, for them, it was a golden age. This exact group of people were the same who designed the new postmodern social compromise, and thus they tried to engineer an ideal society to be as much like the Weimar period as possible. This all begs the same question. We all know what happened at the end of the Weimar. We know that the degradation of the Weimar Republic disgusted the average German so much that they elected a certain Austrian painter who then took Germany into a hard right direction. Will that happen to us? Part 3. The Austrian Painter.
Okay, so Whatifalthist tells us that due to the degeneracy of the Weimar, people elected Hitler. Now, to me it is kind of mysterious what he exactly means by degeneracy, if by that he means to say that the country was economically unstable, that moral values decayed due to the conditions I just described previously, but the main reasons for why Hitler became popular were mass unemployment, and that actually has nothing to do with their values being too liberal or degenerate. It has to do with the instability of capitalism, because the Great Recession happened. It also has something to do with the fact that 12% of German territory was taken from them, that their country was occupied by French military. All of those things were bound to radicalize people. It also had something to do with extreme polarization of their society. And here I actually have to admit, communist violence only helped Hitler. That's the only thing that communists achieved in the Weimar, at least. I'm not saying that leftist violence doesn't work. It works, but only against states that are openly fascist or genocidal or authoritarian. In the Weimar, people became scared of communism because communists were actually more likely to shoot at the police, while the Nazis were more likely to shoot at their political opposition. And in the eyes of an average guy, shooting at the police was worse, which is why many perceived Nazis as the lesser threat. And that is actually one parallel that could be drawn between America today and the Weimar, because the left also happens to, at least in theory, hate the police, while quite surprisingly the right-wingers are also willing to attack the police, if we look at January 6th and events like that. But okay, my point is, Whatifalthist seemed to be implying that degeneracy led to Hitler winning the election, but had that, let's call it degeneracy, not been combined with bad economic conditions and the fact that German soil was occupied, that they lost World War I, I don't think that Hitler would have come to power. And what happened in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, I think, is similar to what happened to the Weimar. In what sense? In a sense that the Russian people began to associate liberal democracy with bad economic situation, chaos, polarization, crime rates being high. And had Yeltsin maybe transitioned to capitalism more gradually, in a better way, maybe the people of Russia would not associate democracy with decadence, and maybe then Putin would have never come to power. We don't know, but yeah, what Whatifalthist should have emphasized is that bad economic situation by pure coincidence got combined with extreme liberalism, and without bad economic situation being combined with extreme liberalism, I do not think that Hitler ever would have come to power, and the same argument can be made for Putin. And I think that Whatifalthist should have emphasized that these two things do not always come together. Bad economy, political instability, and what he perceives as degeneracy. But okay, let us continue.
Want their nation to survive. That being said, as I've said a million times, we are not a wise society. We have already repeated the degeneracy of Weimar, but will we repeat the Austrian painter? If you folks watch my videos...
Well, okay, now for the biggest critique I have of his video. Many historians, political analysts, philosophers for a long time have been comparing the Weimar with America today, and I think that Whatifalthist was actually also right for making this comparison, but there is one pretty obvious thing missing from this comparison. Okay, so if the leftists of today could be compared to communists, or if extreme wokeness can be compared to, let's use his terminology, degeneracy of the Weimar, which I think in some ways it could, it's not a crazy comparison, then who is Hitler? I want an answer to that question. Who would be Hitler then in America today, according to Whatifalthist? And I think that the answer is pretty obvious. It's Donald Trump. Now, I'm not saying that Trump is equally evil as Hitler, nor do I think that he wants to start World War II, nor do I think that he wants to do a genocide. But if we are going to make this comparison work, then just think about this question. Who else could it be? What other movement could be compared to the Nazis if we are going to make this analogy work? There is no other logical answer other than Donald Trump. And by the way, I'm not suggesting that Trump is as evil as Hitler, but I'm just saying if America is the new Weimar, and if this extreme liberalism is going to end with a backlash, and if it's going to actually lead to return to extreme conservatism and authoritarianism, then Whatifalthist should have ended with simply acknowledging that within this analogy, the only figure that could be compared to Hitler is actually Donald Trump and the MAGA movement, and I actually think that in this aspect he decided quite deliberately not to say it in order not to piss off some parts of his audience. But okay, that's my take on the situation. Tell me in the comment section if you disagree. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe if you liked this video.